Welcome to the 6-part series with Carmen Madina. Carmen is a former CIA Deputy Intelligence Director, author, and consultant. Carmen is a thinker and hopes to popularize better thinking. We both feel that philosophy and thinking better are an ideal pairing, and we hope you enjoy this fun, natural conversation. And welcome, everybody. We're in with another episode with Carmen Madina, and Carmen is looking especially radiant this morning, and she's going to blush. But there's something about this. It's like the winter sideways light that's coming in through her home, and she's going to illuminate us here in today's episode with what's going on, the world politics, and the world that is Carmen. So Carmen, before we get into the weeds of analytics and what's going on in the world, how's Carmen doing for just on a day-to-day? What's going on in the life of Carmen Madina?
Things are good. I just got back from Texas last night. I enjoy spending time in Texas. I was there 2 weeks. I've inherited my mom's house. So I'm going to have this peripatetic lifestyle, at least, throughout this year, I imagine, until I figure out what I'm going to do. But Texas is very grounding. COVID no longer exists in Texas, for example. It's just gone away in reality or in terms of wishful thinking. But either way, it's gone away. And there's something very... I'm not sure if I should say reassuring, but there's something very refreshing in the Texas go it alone, independent mindset. I think this is quite accurate, is that like Texas is like the American concept of individualism taken to its ultimate degree and its ultimate manifestation. And I find that interesting, very much so. And but that's about it for me. Just finished speaking at South by Southwest a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw the video. It is available on the YouTube channel, but on a really fascinating subject that I've just become interested in accidentally in the last couple of years, on the possibility of precognition. Oh. And the video, the presentation, I thought went very well. It was very balanced. We can talk about that more if you'd like.
I'd love to hear something about precognition. In fact, I'm already aware of it, and I didn't know that I was.
Okay, being very funny there.
But I'm interested. I'm intrigued. So it's like questioning.
Let me see. I don't think I can say it short, but maybe I can do it at medium length. Okay. A couple of years ago, I was introduced to this woman who's a researcher in precognition. She has her PhD in some kind of sort of communication psychology, but has been working on this topic exclusively almost for the last 15 years. Does precognition exist? And there are, of course, this is something that has been with us forever, since time immemorial. There are, at least a dozen recorded precognitive episodes in the Bible. And a lot of, billions of people presumably believe in the Bible as a holy scripture. There are, of course, many people who have claimed to be psychics, been able to communicate with the dead, or have some idea about the future. And I think some historians have theories as to what particular environment or set of external circumstances or world events kind of encourages or brings about this greater interest in precognition. And more recently and more scientifically, since Einstein, a lot of what we know or think we know about time and how physics work or doesn't work, at least the classical theory, has left sort of an opening for the possibility that time is not linear, and closely related to this topic is the question of what is consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I became, we were connected by a mutual acquaintance, and her real interest was to somehow get the Precognition or her work understood by the national security community. So that's how I became involved. And that's a very difficult thing. Mm-hmm. But along the way, as I became familiar with it, I said one of the things I concluded was that the people who are interested in this phenomenon spend all their time talking to each other. So it's a kind of a closed community. And I thought it would be I think it would be helpful if people started speaking more broadly about the possibility of precognition to broader audiences. And that's how we came up with the idea of speaking at South by Southwest. And the bottom line is that, the physical experiments laboratory type experiments that she's undertaken, if you're familiar, there's a series of experiments where you are asked react to an image, and like you get microseconds to react to the image. You might even have some electronic equipment on you that senses your reactions even faster than you can yourself articulate them. Mm-hmm. And then what her experiments, as I understand them, often do is they have people do that, and then after they've recorded their reaction to an image, then they show them another image, but after the fact. And that other image sort of primes them after the fact for the image that they're seeing before the fact. And so the scientific proof point would be I'm sorry, I don't remember the particulars of what they're trying to evaluate in terms of people's reaction, but that those people who see a relevant image after their moment of recording a reaction are more accurate than those people who don't see an image afterwards. And that a level of being more accurate is statistically significant. And so it's not the most compelling, persuasive of proof points, but it's exactly the kind of careful laboratory condition type of situation that scientists seem to want. So anyway, but really her work now involves training individuals to understand if they have precognitive abilities, and if they do, how to learn to interpret them better and be more accurate. So, as I said, the presentation is on YouTube, and people can think what they will of it. I think it's quite balanced, because I'm somewhat skeptical about it, even though I've learned more about it and have had what I would call interesting experiences. Mm-hmm. I'm not. I wouldn't bet my house on it.
No.
that it actually is true.
Yeah.
But I'm interested enough to continue the work. And if you watch the video of our South by Southwest presentation, and I'm not going to spoil it for you all, because when you watch it, we actually do a demonstration of a precognitive exercise. And so you can play along, and people are asked to think about something, and then after everyone has done their thinking, then we show them what they were supposed to have been thinking about. Mm-hmm. And then we see whether or not people in the audience actually were accurate. And during the Q&A period, a young man came forward and he nailed it. So out of maybe 150 to 200 people in the room, we know of one person who got it almost exactly right. And now, still, one out of, we don't know what everybody did, but 1 out of 150, I don't know. It's hard to measure how impressive that really is. But I'm sure that the people in the audience thought he was kind of a setup, that we had. Of course, we would have someone in the audience who would say, oh, we got it exactly right. Well, he wasn't. He was just somebody that was there at the presentation. But anyway, it's...
Would I spoil it if I asked you what exactly right is?
Well, right would be, I'll tell you, again, I don't want to give it away, but the night before our talk, Julia Mossbridge, who's the researcher, and we selected 4 short videos, like 10 seconds each. We actually selected these videos that were on our phones because we find that when we go to YouTube or whatever, often YouTube will show an ad beforehand, so it kind of pollutes the activity. So we had 4 videos. They were in a file, numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody participated in the exercise, did about a 5-minute meditation, prompted, kind of a guided meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the meditation was, you're going down a hallway, you open the door, what do you see? That's essentially the meditation. The 4 videos were quite different from each other. Fire, air, land, sea are different from each other, quite, different.
So the question is they saw the video and then they went through the meditation.
No, they do the meditation first.
Mm-hmm.
The meditation is done.
Okay.
Then we ask someone in the room to generate a random number, 1 through 4. That's how many videos we had selected, 4.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So someone in the room goes to a random number generator, generates, in this case, they picked, I think it was 1.
Okay.
So video 1 was shown to the audience.
Okay.
Video 1 then, after the fact, becomes the target, the thing that you are hoping to see.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, if you 5 minutes before the target was revealed, if you actually, in essence, saw the target, then you had a moment of precognition about the future.
Oh my! Wow.
Right?
This is very interesting.
You had so there's 150 people in the audience.
Yeah.
And we asked them if they wanted to, so it's voluntary. They could fill out on a little website anonymously describing what they saw. Things like texture, colors, feelings. Animate, inanimate. Just a little series of survey questions. So the person that got it right, again, I don't want to reveal any details, but just about nailed it. So they got everything right except maybe a small detail. So if I told you right now that I'm looking at the blue Cookie Monster cookie jar that sits in my kitchen, and I had asked you a few minutes ago, what will Carmen look at in her kitchen?
If I said the blue, that would be.
You had written down the blue cookie jar.
Yeah, that would be.
But had not
so
gotten
weird.
the fact that it was the Cookie Monster. That would be, graded as that's pretty close.
Yeah.
And now you would say, oh, someone's looking in the kitchen, cookie jar. There's, cookie jar is something that, you can rationalize all of this and and explain it. And what I find most interesting about this, and it's not, I think, controversial. I think this is more mainstream. Is the idea that we all know that we have, as Daniel Kahneman wrote, we have this system 1 and system 2 thinking abilities. There are things that our mind does automatically, that figures out automatically without us consciously having a sense of it, an awareness of it. And then there are other things that we have to work at, that you can actually feel your mind thinking to understand. And during the talk, I used the example of when you're bilingual, which I am, Spanish-English, which many people in Canada are, French-English. When you're bilingual, a mark of someone who is truly bilingual is that they can think in either language without having to think about it. So when I am having a conversation with someone who I know speaks Spanish, or sometimes even if I know they don't speak Spanish, I can all of a sudden slip into a Spanish phrase without any premeditation that I'm aware of and use that phrase simply because it is a better way to express the idea than any phrase I know of in English.
Well, I got a really good example for you.
Yes.
Oh, I got 2 of them actually. So I was when I was in it's like middle school. Okay, so I was in an immersion school, and you're absolutely right. In Canada, we have our secondary language is French. And so I was in an immersion school in middle school. And so in science class, I never learnt the actual words for a Morton and see, I'm even thinking of it in French, like a Morton and Pellier, right? So this like Morton and pillar or whatever it's called, right? I just think of it in French.
Right.
Right. And then the other one is there's one of value where I just think, if I think of a speed bump, right? And I might get some dialect here mixed up, but my wife is fluent in Spanish, probably of the variety in Costa Rica. But when you think of a speed bump, think of El Muerto, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Running over a dead body, right?
They do that in Puerto Rico as well, which cracks me up, It
cracks me up. But so now it's like one has like a value that moves over top of another, literally moves over top of another one, where I think this is the better heuristic to remember because it has this story to it.
Yes,
it has this like funny dunk,
yeah, exactly.
Right, of a running over a dead body, which is kind of morbid, but it sticks in the brain. It's got more sticking power as opposed to English is maybe more like it's actually a speed bump. It's intended to slow,
it's more literal, right?
Yeah, what has more sticking and staying power, right? So that's really interesting. But back to the let's compare and contrast the this type of thinking and this framing that seems to me has kind of happened before. I mean, from an investigation or a law enforcement thing, we can look at things and talk about that show, the X-Files. We can look at the use of psychics in various different law enforcement and discovery.
Exactly. Right.
Where I've been kind of like, I've kind of summarized this, the debunking aspect of it is that the psychic relies on priming from an audience, right? Now, so there would be a certain degree of a population that say it's been completely debunked, right?
Yes,
without, that's their position, and they have compelling evidence that that's the case. But where I think this particular research should go would be to say that person, that 1 in 100, does he have or she have the ability to replicate that?
Exactly.
Some significant, because that's significant, that's statistically significant, but do they have the ability to replicate that again?
Right.
Now, with one exception, if this is a group dynamic and somehow the that one person has more value in predictive power, in unexplained predictive power, and then the next person, it's like almost like you throw agency out of the window and say there's predictive power that happens in unpredictable nodes of individuals.
Right.
How do you pick those unpredictable individuals, right? And it's like that's where it starts to break your mind, right? I mean, it's interesting. That's fascinating to me, but I think it's really, really hard to get behind that from an empirical standpoint.
Well, the work, the government has, particularly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was doing research on what is called remote viewing, being able to see something without being physically next to it, and precognition. And the programs appear to have been officially shut down in the early 1990s. There was actually a study done by CIA, and all this is available in FOIA documents, so anybody can read this, where I think the CIA hired a researcher, a statistician, who at some point ended up being the president of the American Statistical Association or something like that. And her review of the work concluded that the precognitive experiments showed that precognition existed at a better than 50-50 chance occurrence. In other words, that precognition appeared to be valid, but that the government concluded we can't figure out how to use it reliably, to your point. So you have 150 people in a room. They're random individuals. You haven't pre-selected them. Whose precognitive experience do you operationalize? Do you take seriously?
Exactly.
You have no way of making that decision. So really, the only way that, you would have to invest, not necessarily a lot of money because it isn't expensive, but you would have to invest a lot of time, and you would have to be very disciplined over quite a long, in my opinion, over a quite long period of time to get to where you would have some kind of precognitive operation that you could reliably use. So like you would know, for example, this is one of the things that Julia talks about. People tend to have their own aspects of precognition that they're better at. So some people connect better to emotional future events. Other people connect better to like an engineering thing. When I've done these episodes, my mind is very verbal. So I don't get pictures. I don't get images. I get words. What shows up in my mind are words. And so you'd have to know all of that and kind of assemble a team that kind of encompasses all kinds of sensory experiences in terms of their affinity, and then run them over and over and over again until you got a sense of what's reliable and what's not. And this would take quite a long period of time. And I don't know that government or the typical business has patience for it. Julia shares this quote during our talk, and so you can hear it precisely. But the same woman who studied it for the CIA was making a presentation some years later at some conference of American statisticians. And she asked statisticians, right? She asked them, what would it take for them to believe in the possibility of precognition? And, greater scientific experiments, more and better, precise scientific experiments, or a compelling personal experience. And the statisticians, by a significant margin, picked a compelling personal experience, which, if you think about it, is all wrong, right?
Yeah.
They wanted an anecdote. They wanted their own personal anecdote experience to convince themselves of the possibility of precognition. So you find that people that are understandably skeptical of this, there's no amount of scientific experimentation that seems to persuade them that it's possible. So, just to finish my point, what I think is useful, you can put aside whether precognition is possible, getting people more in touch with their intuitive abilities, a word that it's hard to define. We certainly know our intuition when we experience it. We all have, every one of us, every day has a moment when a thought enters their mind, kind of unexpectedly. Oh, why am I thinking of this right now? And over time, you begin to understand, I think I understand a little bit more of how my brain reacts to external stimuli to pull up something to present it to me. There's actually some research that's been done that I thought was quite interesting recently, that your brain does work a little bit like a file cabinet in that it puts stuff away in certain parts of the brain. So when you think about doing something and are walking to the other room in the house where you have to be to do whatever it is you've actually thought about, and then the moment you walk into that room, you can't remember anymore why you walked into, why did I go into this room? You can't remember anymore. There's a physical explanation for that. Your brain kind of keeps track of where you are in space and time. And the very act of going from one room to the other kind of cleans out the RAM. Whoosh.
Yeah.
And that's why you forgot, because
that's the most well-documented piece of empirical information. That's fascinating. I think that's interesting that it does that our minds
so anyway, Anyway, that's the most. I mean, it's good. All I know is that it's good as you get older to get interested in new things. So
Yes.
Pursuing a new topic is always, always, always good for you.
Yeah, I just don't know if that would be my choice of a new topic. I would bring that one in. I want to bring in a parallel in philosophy. I have to bring up your use of peripatetic between the two houses that you're actually walking between. You must be getting a incredible amount of exercise. If I'm assuming your peripatetic involves some sort of fossil fuel vehicle or something like that. but the philosophical part of it is very interesting. So from Plato, he describes cognition in a way that is everywhere in all things, right? And so I think what he's doing, or the heuristic that I use, is that he's actually describing our abstract abilities, right? This ability of our imagination, right? And so with all knowledge being in this abstract realm. Now, the reason why it falls short, in my opinion, is that when people critique it, they think, well, obviously there's no kind of like secondary realm where all ideas exist, right? And then I think that's kind of that's taking the wisdom that Plato is using to describe the phenomenon and throwing it out the window, like the baby bathwater thing, right? If you use it to think about a description of recall, which he goes into in more detail in his dialogues, it's about this ability to recall and pull information, something that you may have known in a younger version of yourself, or from a framework of a society. There's lineage of information that transmits, that we could say transcends space and time, right? We get into conversations about lineage theory in cultural transmission, which is effectively how we describe God. The idea of the cultural transmission. There's an actual real purpose for that, of transmitting culture, and that's changing. So in the beginning, we had cultural transmission that actually took the form of spoken word, right? Which perhaps you have more intuition, or you're more orientated toward that spoken word, right? As the poets are, which Shelley says the poets are the legislators of society. And I love that phrase. I love the phrase that, where do you come up with this? Well, it's that deep imagining and creativity that finds and legislates new knowledge, right? And where do you pull that from? Well, it's from this constellation, this galaxy of neurons that happen to be between your two ears and my two ears and the other person's two ears. It happens to be there. And so it's fascinating that you identify as a language animal, because I knew it, Carmen. I knew you were a philosopher at heart. I knew it. I knew you were. So welcome to the club as a philosopher. I think I lost
as I said at the beginning, I took a lot of philosophy courses and loved them all when I was in university, and I still read philosophy, I think broadly defined.
So
I'm reading right now a book that I read a very good review of, called The Strudelhof Steps. Have you ever heard of it? It's a book that was written in Vienna right after World War I. And so I've like, the period of history that fascinates me the most is that period between the two world wars, which were so vibrant, so creative. And this book was just recently translated from the German, so been unknown unless you could read German. But it's about 900 pages long, so it's quite hefty.
Right.
And it's been compared to Proust, which I have read. But unlike Proust, it's much easier to read. The guy is a snappy writer, witty. You would never really describe Proust as witty, but he is. And it's, I've just started it. I don't know what made me think of it other than that you said I'm a language person.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he's just studying, just like Proust, he's studying humanity in all its permutations. And I always find that quite interesting. So recommend, it's available as an ebook, but the Strudelhoff Diaries.
Wow, that's really interesting. You pick up some pretty hefty books. I mean, I think even to say that you've read Proust, I mean, that's like, one of the biggest books ever in terms of.
It's about, I don't know, it's between 4 and 5, depending upon, where you buy it, it's 4,000 to 5,000 pages of content.
Yeah.
And I have purposefully not read like the last 200 pages. And the final volume is kind of a recap almost of the whole thing. And
right.
it's almost like I'm superstitious about finishing it. I'm not going to finish it. I'm just going to leave those there.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I know I've read parts of it, but I've listened to the audio because the particular copy that I have is quite beautiful to listen to. It's it's dramatized, and it flows so nicely in terms of, and this is the style that I would describe that Proust brings to life, is this this flowing of conscious thought.
Yes.
Right. And so I enjoy listening to that.
Yeah.
In an audible form.
Yeah.
One thing I would either partially warn you about, and that comes from that same skeptical bone that I think you have, is that the particular time between World War I and World War II is so punctuated by German ideology, right?
Yes.
As much as it's rich, it's also, I think it has like a destructive element to it as well. I think you could probably, agree with that. But and I find that it's not a trap, but I mean there are some rich thinkers. So, for example, Martin Heidegger. Okay, so
of course
you could have him, who George Steiner called him the secret king of thought. And actually the attribution, I think, came from his mistress, which was Hannah Arendt.
Yeah.
So we call him the secret king of thought. And the more time I spend with him, the less I think that's the case. But the community that you're involved with isn't on the same plane, right? They're when you immerse yourself in such, a prodigious and deep thinker, it's hard to stay way out, because some of the smartest minds in the world get sucked in and can never, they can't come out of that black hole.
Right.
And I find that this happens with Marx, it happens with Heidegger, it happens with, more of the German ideologists. I mean, Heidegger's Being and Time, the dedication, was, to another German philosopher. Right. Schopenhauer, I believe. And so it starts to kind of like fold in on itself. And the thing to watch out for, in my opinion, is there's the mustard seed of intellectual and cultural elitism in there. And I'm saying that only from a simplistic standpoint, because there's so many people would disagree with me. But on the basis, because I can't really simplify it in a way that, without providing like a written essay or something like that. Yeah. But it has this ability to provide such like rich, colorful, beautiful, a beautiful contribution. In fact, Heidegger actually had a book called Contributions. And then you can look at somebody like Goethe, who really tried to put the project of transcending space and time into something that was more abstract, and even Immanuel Kant. Like, it's just, they're so rich, these thinkers.
Yes, right. Yeah,
it's almost like they almost like they tried to reinvent something that was Greek in a way that was in German.
Yes.
And it never blossomed. It's like planting the seeds and having, nothing really, something grows, but not to the status of classic, which is something that'll carry through for, 5,000 years sort of thing, right?
You make good points. There's a book, it's still on my bedstand. It's one of those things you can pick up and read little chapters of. I believe it was called Cultural Amnesia by Clive James. I think I've got his name right, who died recently. He was a Australian essayist and poet, kind of jack of all trades, semi-journalist. And the book, he argued, it's got about 100 short profiles of, I think, mostly, 20th century individuals, almost all men, who deserve to be remembered and who he feels history has not treated well. So Walter Benjamin is in that group.
Oh, nice! Yeah. I love him. He's actually one of my favorite in terms of the Marxist thinkers.
Exactly, and there's a whole bunch of people like that, and it's just chock full of Austrians, Germans, Czechs, one after the other. And I actually went off and read. The ones I found most interesting, I would go and find one of their books and read them, and a lot of them were like journalists who were either in Germany or academics in the 20s and 30s, and who saw it all coming. And so what you read is maybe like a play written in 1928 by some Austrian guy where he nails it. He knows exactly what's going to happen, but it's all, I wish I could think of the name and I could find it for you if I researched it, but he just nails it all. And I just think that's just so interesting to me that there, the number of people often the arts is like an antenna sensing something that's going on, that it's like the artists tend to be system one thinkers, right? They're not like super, I'm going to put my stroke here and then I'll put this note here. They're more like something is speaking through them. But the artists could see it coming, what exactly they weren't sure of. And a lot of people talk about our current time as similar to that. Of course, it is a century later. You know what they say about fiction, that the cheapest plot device is the passage of time. Have you heard that?
No. Yeah.
I just love that little saying, time moves on and that just advances the plot somehow. And, it's cheap, but it is actually also true that the passage of time is the ultimate plot device, because that's kind of what happens, right? But so we think about this in terms of we're living in the 20s again, and we've got this odd thing of we're having a pandemic to open up the decade. And as a student of the 20s and 30s of the previous century, I can tell you that people did not often write about the Spanish flu as being a significant causal agent for what happened in the 1920s. Although I think now, when we have our own pandemic, people are looking back at that and going, So, for example, inflation. Inflation is, if inflation occurs in Germany because of reparations and the weakened currency, but, were there other contributing factors like what's going on now with the sudden increase in demand? Anyway, it's way more complex for any one individual to really, for at least most individuals to come to grips with. And this gets you to really the valid reason for philosophy and philosophers are to have any hope for understanding the world as it is emerging in real time. You have to think about it. It's not going to happen casually. At least you can't count on it happening casually, some little moment of insight entering your brain.
Let me push another aspect of skepticism that might unify the philosopher to something that matches your intuition. And so what I would say is that I personally think that we put too much emphasis on the long-term predictive power, and with complex systems, it's hard for us to, as a species, to kind of give up on the predictive nature of reality the way it unfolds, right? If it's truly a complex system, then what do we rely on? Well, we rely on prudence and wisdom, and this is a part of the philosophical edifice of wisdom that we really need to, fall back on and say, we know things are going to be unpredictable. We know things are going to unfold in ways that we can't predict. So and this is, I will emphasize the Stoic tradition, how can we best situate ourselves and prepare for the complexity, the manifestations of entropy that will, confront us? And I find that if we have a preoccupation towards trying to predict too much, right, we kind of forget and neglect some of the wisdom that will get us here, and this type of thing. So philosophy has to also really, it's great to think about, or it's a great tool for exercising rationality, but it's also an excellent tool, more so for wisdom, right? For saying,
yes,
okay,
of course,
right. We only have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to in part kind of challenge you, because I'll prime you and I'll kind of orientate you towards your precognitive state here. So, because we're having some fun with this, right? Okay. So Carmen has a beautiful mind, just to let everybody, this is kind of the summary, right? Well, you do. I mean, you love literature, you love books, you're pursuing things in a way that is to some sort of like, this isn't typical what an analyst would actually pursue, right? I mean, and so my priming is to say, you've been there, done that. You've had books, you've written books. When is the book that is more artistic and brought through you from the muses, so to speak? When is that going to come out of you?
That's such a good question.
Notice I didn't say if ever, but because it's like you have this like, this beauty in language and how you approach it. So is it within you? Is it something that you could focus on and produce?
I would like to think that it is something I could focus on and produce. And I was flying yesterday for most of the day. So when I fly, you get these random thoughts enter into your mind. And I was thinking again, at least at some point yesterday, about, how could is there something I could do to present my ideas or my thinking or my whatever my sense? Would it be interesting to people? I find that when I talk in public or do something like this or do a podcast, a little bit, much to my surprise, people seem to be interested in it and get some value out of it. And it would be fun to engage in some long form about it. And every year I make the same resolution that I'm going to write more for my blog and do more like that. And then I never do it. I don't know why. So it's an interesting thing. It's kind of a question of motivation and that great old phrase, when the spirit moves me.
All the time has to be right. The timing has to be right.
I would like to do it. I mean, I like to tell stories, and I would like to, I'd like to find, it would be, let's do it in a system 2 way. What are the 10 greatest or most original things I have to say? What are those 10 things? 1, 2, 3. And then is there a story either from history or my own experience that I can find to illustrate each one? That would that would move you down the road.
I don't agree.
No. Okay.
No, you're falling into a type 2 thinker. I told you
this was a type 2 way of doing it. Yes.
Right. So you need structure that will not negate the type 1 from the first letter, right? So you need some sort of, for whatever reason, this idea that I came up with, and I'm, it's not meant to force the idea on you, but I came up with something called an objective ontological framework. And so effectively what you do is you make the nodes they could be a combination of lists, a combination of nodes, right? And then it's up to you to try and weave that thread together without the structure that you're looking at, right? Without the structure. So you want as much subjectivity as possible.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes the best way to do that is to take a great piece of literature and write in response to it. So if you notice that something like, let's go back to Martin, was it Martin Heidegger? I could be wrong here, but it could have been Martin Heidegger that actually set up being in time structurally very similar to the way Hegel wrote, and it ends up being kind of like this response to.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, I see. Yes.
So it doesn't start with your top 10 list, right? It starts with, here's this thinker and here's the path he's pulling me down, and here's my response to them. Mm-hmm. And the structure is theirs, right? So it doesn't have to be my ontological framework. It doesn't have to be, but you can take something that's probably like a classic structure, a classic in literature, and then try and run that through as a response, right? And so, and then you say, well, okay, well, I need a little bit more to shore it up. Well, look at the indexes, look at the structure, look at how they organized the presentation of their ideas. And it can be like, look at titles and look at, you don't have to, you can fill in those blanks based off of how they've made the nodes.
Right.
Right. That might be a good way to start, right? To get that subjective type one sort of
right, to have it be more of a journey, so that one thing takes you to another thing without you having plotted that journey in advance.
Right. And this is why I like Plato so much, because they, as Whitehead said, and then we're really at the top of the hour here, but Whitehead talked about Plato having the footnotes to Plato. All of Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato. Right. Out of all the philosophizing and the philosophy that I've read, circle back to Plato, because effectively it has this impregnated, and Socrates uses this even as a midwifery of sorts, right? Mm-hmm. It's about birthing these ideas and bringing them into existence. But he used irony and contradiction a lot, which I know that's an alarm bell for you. Like, what is it about this that 1 + 1 doesn't equal two? Like, what is it? I don't know that it's 3. I don't know that it's 4. Why don't these add up?
Right.
And so the irony is the point to focus on, right? But the underlying piece is goodness. The underlying piece is I'm moving this in a direction that has something that is of value, right? And so rather than looking at the euphemisms and these kinds of things, I mean, that would be my advice to you.
If interesting. Yeah, it's useful.
Yeah.
No, you may be right.
Or it's the null hypothesis, like we talked about earlier.
Right? I've told you, by the way, I think I have one of my personal favorite aphorisms is that irony is the most powerful force in the universe. And I actually heard that from a ice hockey commentator, sportscaster, who was many, many years ago handicapping the playoffs to the Stanley Cup and saying, well, even though I think this is the worst year that whatever team has had in 10 years, I think they're actually poised for a playoff run because irony is the most powerful force in the universe. And I went, wow, that's wisdom. And I'm taking it, and unfortunately, there's so much potential irony in the universe at any one time that it weakens its predictive potential, because you don't know which moment of irony is going to actually occur, right? Because irony is all around us.
Yes.
Irony is really just another way of saying unpredictability.
There you go. Well said. I don't know if we're any further than where we started, but
okay.
Carmen, thank you very much, and we'll see you for our final episode, which is going to be next month. And to anybody listening, stay tuned, and looking forward to seeing you again. Thanks, Carmen.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.